also want to win New York and make it safe.
Establishment all the way back to a couple blocks from where we are now at the UN.
I should just mention that this is, for those that aren't aware, it's this agency specifically for refugees, Palestinian refugees.
Right, and I guess I maybe clarify it even a little further, which is that the UN has a all-purpose refugee organization that tries to settle refugees. It's called UN High Commission for Refugees, and that's for all the refugees in the world except for one group, and that's the Palestinians. And UNRWA is the singular commission for Palestinian refugees, and it would extend technically, to somebody like Gigi Hadid, who's a supermodel in Beverly Hills, but who came from Palestine before 1948. It's not just a waste of money, but it does sponsor schools that really inculcate people with deep hatred for Jews. I mean, I can tell you one fourth grade school play, and half the kids dress up as Jews, with like beards and big noses put on. I mean, worst caricatures of Jews, and then the others dress up as terrorists with machine guns and fatigues. And the guys with the machine guns shoot the Jews fall down dead, and then the guys with the guns take a bow, and the parents all applaud. This is a fourth grade play, and it's all under the supervision of UNRWA. So I think it's broken. I think it's irretrievably broken. I don't know how many UNRWA employees were Hamas terrorists, but it's not a small number. And I just start from scratch.
And so, what do you expect the U.S. will do?
I think under the Trump administration, I know they're going to be very circumspect about any organization that purports to inject money back into the Gaza Strip without getting real assurances that the money is going to go to the right places. I think we need another country to come in that has some credibility. Again, I'm not sure why anyone wants to jump into this mess, but the idea that America is going to throw money at this without real assurances that it's going to lead to a better outcome, I think I'd be very skeptical.
Without further ado, let's state that.
Sure.
Well, why don't you kind of lay out the argument for me?
Sure.
Yeah.
You started with the conclusion that we can't have a Palestinian state. It is an existential risk to Israel. It's probably an existential risk to Jordan as well. The last thing the world needs is a terror state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. The Palestinians have proven themselves ineligible to have a state in which they control their airspace, their borders, their electromagnetic spectrum. I mean, they just can't. It's too much of a risk to the entire region. So now we're sort of in the business of collecting resumes, right? Who's best equipped to be sovereign? Someone's got to be sovereign.
Ambassador, let me just jump in for a moment. So basically you're saying that the Palestinian people do not have a right of self-determination. Is that what you're saying here?
On a national level, yeah, I would say that, sure. And I'm not sure why they're any different from other peoples that don't have. I mean, there are lots of peoples around the world that don't have their own country, that are living good lives and are content with their environment. So, and I would also say that the Palestinians have never really expressed a serious desire for national self-determination. That's different from controlling your own local taxes, your own local zoning, your own local curriculum, assuming it's not malign. I don't think anyone would deny any people the right to have local autonomy, but national self-determination, where they get an army and they get the ability to act, potentially against their neighbors, no, because they've shown no capacity to live in peace with their neighbors for a period of decades, many, many decades, and of course the low point being on October 7th, 2003. But the other thing I would say, Jan, is that their leadership, Mahmoud Abbas is supposed to be the better one, the better leader of the bunch, right? He got a phone call into President Trump, after the election. He's in like the 19th year of a 4-year term, right? I mean, he was elected for 4 years. He stayed on for 15 years. He hasn't called elections. He's shown a massive capacity for corruption and enrichment of his cronies. So I think that, from the perspective of the Palestinians, of which I have a decent perspective, having spent 4 years in the region and meeting a lot of Palestinian government to act appropriately, to make their lives better and more prosperous, more freedom, more dignity. So I think you have to look at this not in terms of absolute rights. It's a question of reality, facts on the ground, and what's happened in the past. And on this record, I would say the Palestinians do not have a right of national self-determination.
Essentially, you're arguing for Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank.
Right. I am. But Israel's sovereignty over the West Bank does not mean the absence of a right of the Palestinians to live there. The West Bank is divided into areas A, B, and C. And areas A and B are entirely Arab. And area C is mostly Jewish, although Arabs have encroached into it. My view is that get rid of all those fictions. One large territory governed by Israel, where Israel will export to this region the values of democracy and freedom and opportunity that it has in its own legally recognized country. And the Palestinians who live in this territory will continue to live there, as will their children and their grandchildren. They'll have the rights to be permanent residents in this territory, and their lives will improve dramatically. I mean, that's the. It's not there's, and I think this is a very important point because people love to use the A word, the apartheid word when they talk about Israel generally, and people should study apartheid because apartheid was efforts by the South African government, the racist South African government, to take black people, pull them out of their homes, move them into shanties without running water or electricity, and move them all into these substandard areas. This is the opposite. This is a plan where the Palestinians who live in the West Bank will live there, will have the legal entitlement to remain there, their children, their grandchildren as well, and their lives will be improved because Israel will then, once it has sovereignty over this area and it owns it, it will have the capacity to then inject better roads and highways and schools and hospitals. So it's an end to the notion of a Palestinian state, right? Because obviously if Israel takes sovereignty over the entirety of the land, that would have been, at least in part, earmarked for a Palestinian state. There can no longer be a Palestinian state. That's a good thing. That's a good thing for Israel. It's a good thing for Jordan. It's a good thing for the world. It's a good thing for the Palestinian people as well. Look, inside of Israel right now, there's a 20% Arab minority, right? There's about 4 or 5 elite universities in Israel, maybe better than some of our most elite universities. More than 20% of the students in these elite universities are Arab, right? Arabs have achieved, the pinnacle of law, medicine, commerce, business, academia. So, Israel has a track record of empowering its minorities and treating them well. And my argument, and that's why I'm very careful about the words I use for the book, one Jewish state. Okay? There's 30 or 40 Muslim states around the world, right? There's Christian states, Buddhist states, Hindu states. Okay? We're just talking about one Jewish state, just one, right? It's the size of New Jersey. Okay, and my argument is that there ought to be room in this world for one Jewish state on the land, as to which the Jewish people have the greatest, historical entitlement than any people anywhere in the world. If Israel's going to absorb this territory, you run the risk that Palestinians are going to elect a non-Jewish regime for the one Jewish state. So we have to find a way to thread this needle, and I believe it's threadable. There's no government in the world that hasn't created some negotiated regime around the goals that the government sought to achieve. So, for example, when America was formed, right, there was a concern about just having a House of Representatives, right, which is the most populist house, most populist body of our branches of government, right, because it's picked directly by people in every single congressional district. So they created a Senate, right? What does the Senate mean? The Senate means that if I live in Montana, right, where I am, 1/1000th of the population of the United States, I still get to pick 1/50th of the United States Senate. Is that a democracy? These are the various, interests that came together to create our country, right? It's not a pure democracy. So we can come up with 10 different ways to thread this needle. What we can't do is create a governance mechanism that jeopardizes the one Jewish state. Short of that, the Palestinians would have autonomy on civilian matters. I think that would, frankly, give people a lot of pride as to how the Palestinians are able to run their lives.
I think you're suggesting they wouldn't have voting rights. Is that right?
Not on a national level. Arabs in Israel have that right. Citizens of Israel have that right. I had one example. I pointed out the fact that, in America and Puerto Rico, they also don't vote.
So this isn't necessarily such a new idea, right? I mean, Caroline Glick wrote a book about it.
Right.
There's people that are advocating for it, but it's just something that you don't hear very much about on this side of the pond, so to speak. Right. So why is that?
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, there's only so much appetite people have to really deal with a problem that's been around forever. For everybody's collective memory, it's always been a problem, and I think people might productively spend their time elsewhere. The other thing is the two-state solution has become, if you will, certainly it's the mother's milk of the Democratic Party, and probably other than Trump, the mother's milk of the Republican Party. I mean, this is somehow people kind of got this idea back from the early 90s that this was the idea. You put the Jews over here, you put the Palestinians over there. They live, equal measures of whatever you think is important, of autonomy and dignity, and they live side by side, and we'd have peace and kumbaya. It's just a fantasy. I mean, it's the lazy man's approach to the Middle East, because you just say, yeah, why don't we just split, they're having a dispute on land, let's split it up, draw a line, split it up, everybody gets what they get, and then it's not what the conflict is about. Palestinians do not want to live peacefully in a state side by side in Israel. The Palestinian movement, from the day it was created, is a movement to destroy the state of Israel. It's not a two-state solution. It's really their one-state solution. When you hear everybody yelling on college campuses, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that is the Palestinian goal. From the Jordan River to the sea, which means extinguish the state of Israel, replace it with Palestine. I think that people don't want to confront that unpleasant reality, because once you confront it, and you got to deal with it, well, it makes it much harder, right? You lose your convenient, split the baby argument. Nobody has managed to construct a two-state solution that won't be an existential threat to the state of Israel.
Well, Ambassador David Friedman, it's such a pleasure to have had you on the show.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you all for joining Ambassador David Friedman and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.